Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today.
It does sound sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah.
With the ACE community for 3 years now.
Actually outlined everything.
Something that we find in the society.
First, talk about the problems that you're trying to solve.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining another episode of Deep Random Talks. Today, we have a slightly different flavor of the show. We are interviewing one of our co-hosts as a guest on this episode because she has built a very interesting application and she's been working on this for a while. We want to go through the journey that she's gone. So, hi Serena, hi Roxana. It's exciting to have you back on the show. What is new with you, Roxana?
Well, so it's been quite a while since we've done this. So, what I guess the biggest thing is I stopped consulting full time for a company and I'm all on my own now. Also consulting full time, but across different little pieces and fully independently. So, it's been a very fun adventure.
Interesting. So, what are some of the works that you're doing? Not the details of the work, but the type of the works that, like, if somebody is looking for consulting, who should reach out to you?
Good question. So, I've done everything from, someone needed me on a weekend for a workshop around behavior change or cogsci principles and how do you really apply them in real life, up to strategic initiatives. I have a plan or I have the money for a 5-year roadmap. I need to have that roadmap research informed. So things like stakeholder initiatives and that kind of strategic work in the early phases. But with each new initiative, I'm doing something different. So my most recent one has been really interesting. Just a few hours of engagement. Take some content and make sure it sounds fully human-like and not robot-like, because it was actually written by humans, but it was perceived as being written by robots. So that was a really, really fun over the weekend one.
So generally speaking, then a strategy development and product roadmap and a strategy roadmap and ideas like this.
Yeah.
All right. And Serena, how are you doing? What's new with you?
I'm good, yeah. Nothing too new is going on. I have 2 new foster dogs, I was saying to Roxana, so that's always a lot of fun. And to your point, Roxana, about content written by humans that sounds like it was written by a robot, we can get into this, but I have a vegan, I think people have heard that I have a vegan social media account, Friendly Veg on TikTok and Friendly Veg _ on Instagram. And I often will get messages from people saying that they think my voice is very robotic, but spoken by a human sounds like a robot.
You gotta hire Roxana and explore that. Um, I said it there, robotic.
Yeah.
But, so what are you all drinking today? I'm having good old water because I had too much coffee today already.
I didn't have a lot of options. I'm in dance lab at the university, but what I found are very, very old little packets of instant Viet coffee. So I think they're about 3 years old. It still tastes really, really good and just smells like fall.
Is it just coffee or coffee with like a milk powder?
Of course, it's condensed milk and
Right,
sugar.
okay, I thought
Otherwise,
so.
why would you find the little...
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so for me, I have a huge smoothie, very stereotypical for a vegan today because we were going to be touching on veganism, and then I also have some hot water.
Very cool. So, Serena, we are talking to you today about the journey of building your product from, the moment that you woke up one morning and you were like, maybe I should actually create this until today. So, yeah, Roxana, why don't you get us started and we'll go from there.
Sure. So Serena and I have talked about this time and time again. And one of the things since I've met her that left me wanting more every time I speak with her is just how she's been able to put this together. And everyone, by the end of it, when you hear the complexity of it all, you're probably going to wonder or assume she has like 5 teams behind her, data side, machine learning, UX, whatever. But actually, It's just her. And that's just wearing all those multiple hats. That's what I want to hear more about.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so flattered. I often feel like I haven't done a lot of work, but in preparing for this session, I really felt quite proud about myself. So what I've built, the app is called Food Shake, so it enables you to convert any non-vegan recipe to vegan. And the problem I'm really trying to solve is how might we enable people who go vegan to actually stay vegan? And you can look at the stats in different ways, but I think something like 80% of people who try to go vegan end up failing. They revert back to their previous lifestyle. So yeah, this problem I'm really trying to solve is enabling people to stay vegan. And I like this problem a lot because, well, first of all, I am vegan, so it's something very close to my heart. And it can also be extended to any diet. So you can think of it as, how might we enable people who have to eat gluten-free to stay gluten-free, that sort of thing. So I can see there being applications sort of broader beyond veganism, which for me makes it feel like a very inclusive problem to tackle. But again, focusing on veganism for now.
Something that I've been thinking a lot about for a really long time now is that so many people have ideas, right? Like we all have ideas, and some are definitely not worth pursuing, but some of them are. And the ones worth pursuing are not always followed through. So, I know when you came up with this idea, you were pretty young. How did you decide I'm actually going to go and do something about it? Like, what was that? How did you get it started? I feel like that's the threshold that many don't step over.
Yeah, well, so I went vegetarian when I was 13, and then I went vegan when I was, I think, 16. And I've always sort of thought, like, how can I help other people who want to go vegan stay vegan? I think broadly, I just want to help people. I'm very much a millennial in that sense. And so when I went vegan in high school, my dad, who was the one who cooked for our family and still is, he said, okay, great. You're going to cook for yourself because I don't know what to cook for you. None of my recipes can be made into vegan. And he coined this term that we still like to talk about called recipe anxiety, which is where you have anxiety around recipes that can't be transformed into a particular diet. So I ended up having to learn to cook for myself, which has served me very well. Many people don't learn to cook until maybe university, but I learned it in high school. And I sort of recently realized that a few things came to a head, in the past year or so. So I'd been vegan for many years at this point, last year. And I realized that I have something called vegan intuition. So I go to the grocery store and I will look at products on the shelf and I'll think, oh, that one's vegan or that one's not. And I also realized that I was sort of doing this vegan recipe conversion in my head whenever I would look at non-vegan recipes. So that's sort of where the idea came from.
So if I understand correctly, I mean, you and I have been talking about this quite a bit as well. Uh, but if I remember correctly, the very first problem statement that you had was, people want to be vegan, but there is a huge barrier of entry, which is, okay, what do I eat now? So a lot of us, including myself, still have this impression that eating vegan or any sort of restricted diet than whatever I can buy on the street means a lot of time commitment, means a lot of money, and means a lot of modification of things that I have to do. And that's huge. Like most people don't want to bother with all the above. So is that, sort of the problem statement you started with?
I would say so, yeah. And again, going back to my conversation with my dad, it was really around like seeing him struggle through this and seeing him say, oh, to your point of view, oh, this is very expensive for me to buy. This can't be made vegan because XYZ. And also to expand. So at the time, well, for many years, I had been helping my dad convert our recipes to vegan. So that really was sort of the main problem statement. Like, how can we enable people to convert recipes into vegan? And we can get into this later, but I eventually did change that problem statement more into enabling people to stay vegan, whatever means necessary. But in particular, in the past few years, I've been thinking more about like machine learning, of course, and embedding methods. And I really realized last year, when I'm looking at a recipe for my dad, let's say, and maybe he has chicken in his curry recipe, I look at that and I think tofu or chickpeas or, vegan chicken, for example. And I thought, actually, I think what I'm doing in my head is finding the most similar vegan ingredient, most similar to that non-vegan ingredient, sort of like I have that index of the embeddings and the representations of those ingredients in my head, and I'm just, pulling that down and making that substitution. So that made me think in the past year or last year, can I automate this process that I've been doing in my head based off of my many years of experience?
Okay, so before we go even deeper, I want to take it a few steps back because I'm really stuck on that step of like, how do you make it happen? So okay, so you came up, you found your problem. What was your step one? Why not just writing those recipes for your dad or yourself in a notebook? Like, what was literally step one? Like, woke up in the morning and then this is my start. Like what's point zero?
That's a good question. I think the reason I didn't just do this for my dad is probably simply because we weren't living in the same city. Last year, I live in Toronto, he lives in Vancouver, and it would have been a bit painful to have him email me all of his recipes because they're all printed out on paper. And I think that sort of just made me think, oh, there must be a way to do this automatically. And I think at the beginning I was really searching I was trying to solve a problem, or actually I wasn't trying to solve a problem, I was just trying to build a solution because it was intellectually curious and something I wanted to see if I would be able to do. But I wasn't really like problem focused.
One of the very important, I guess, lessons that a lot of people talk about when it comes to product development is that the fact that you read books doesn't mean that you can create a bookstore business, right? So you were experiencing this problem yourself, but how do you know that there are enough people out there, or how did you go about figuring out if there are many other people who are experiencing a similar thing, or is this just completely unique to you?
Yeah, definitely. So based off my years of being vegan, because it has been about 10 years overall, and based off of conversations with friends, it was really in my personal life I realized that there are other people who just have no idea how to make a recipe vegan, and it affected me, not just personally when I was cooking, but it affected me if I went to potlucks with friends would say, oh, I'm so sorry, um, there's nothing for you because I didn't know how to make my whatever recipe into vegan. So that was one way I sort of did this market research just through living. And then I also went to places like Reddit, and I had spent a lot of time in different Facebook groups, in particular Toronto Vegans, which was always has been a really great resource for me. And there's a lot of messages that people will post saying, hey, I have this recipe and I don't know how to make it vegan. Or people will say things like, I really miss my grandma's banana muffins and I haven't had them for 5 years since I went vegan. Oh, what I would give to be able to taste that again. And I think when you're in this sort of community where like veganism is restrictive in a sense because you're getting rid of a whole bunch of different things that you would have eaten before. When you're in a sort of restrictive, or you have a diet that feels restrictive, I don't want to say it is restrictive, but it's pretty common to miss out on the things you used to eat and then eventually maybe revert. So, yeah.
I really like how you started because in so many cases, particularly with startups or with small teams, I kind of see two things. For one of them is that they don't do that pre-research before getting started. It's like because of time, because of budget, because of all these reasons, resources, they only do it once there's already a solution to put in front of people. And then not only that you did it, you also found a way to do it in a budget friendly way. And that secondary research, whether it's Facebook, Reddit, on very low budget projects. I've done it too for diabetes apps, for epilepsy apps, just getting started. There's so much out there and so many groups and people want to help and they have that desire to be contributors really. And there is a way that too many people skip over because they're not aware of these, like, I don't want to call it well, like if it were code, I would call it low code. So I don't know what the equivalent is. And I guess what I'm wondering is how, like, you're you're more of a numbers person by training. How did you get all these like qualitative info and made sense of it to create something to actually put in front of people as that like round one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think this touches on sort of user research and prototyping and the whole app development life cycle, which I want to just like back up and clarify. So I pretty much did this market research at the beginning, and I had a few assumptions. So like the assumption that um, converting your existing recipes to vegan, that's something that will help you go vegan. And I in this market research phase, I had listed out all the different sort of pillars of what I cared about and my key assumptions. And when I found sort of like what felt like facts or like anecdotes to back those up, I would just like write that down. So I haven't, or in the market research phase, it wasn't really hugely quantitative. It really was much more qualitative, but there was that sense of, oh, I'm seeing the same thing said over and over again, and I can bucket this concern about veganism into this bucket.
Amir looked like he has a question, but I do have one actually. I think one of the things, because you're a team of one, really, and usually when someone designs a solution or creates a solution, it's their idea, is their baby, professional baby, but also they're the ones doing the research. It's hard not to, it's hard to be objective. So I really appreciate that. And I think that's like a huge tip to highlight. Before going into that market research, you actually outlined everything. And this is what I think. And then used it as a validation and complementing your existing provisional hypotheses, which otherwise, as a developer, as a designer, as anything, you go in, it's just human bias, it's human nature to go looking for information that confirms what you want to hear.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm quite worried that I have in fact done that. And I've been very fortunate to be able to chat with Amir throughout this entire process over the past year that I've been developing Food Shake. And it's been just so helpful to have somebody else who's experienced with product development to check me. And one of the things that Amir helped me with after my market research phase was really that sort of zeroing in on the problem statement. So Amir had me do this so what exercise where I think of it as like I said my solution, which was I want to create an app that lets people convert a recipe into vegan. And then I had to ask myself, so what? So it was like, okay, so what? Well, so people can eat the vegan version of their favorite meal. And then, so what again? Okay, well, so people find that going vegan can be a simple transition. And then eventually, so what? So people who want to go vegan, so people who go vegan can stay vegan. And I had to do this process multiple times to actually find that problem statement that I truly cared about. And I was sort of praying throughout the entire process that I would land on a problem statement that lines up well with the solution I want to implement. And at the same time, I was trying to keep myself open to the fact that this idea that I have might not be the right solution to my problem statement. And fortunately, throughout my user interviews, when I've been trying to validate and invalidate my assumptions at every step of this so what exercise, I've still found that a recipe converter seems to be one way to address the problem that I really care about.
Yeah, so we did spend a lot of time talking about this problem, and I think that that's a very significant problem, and probably why many products fail is the fact that the creators or designers end up just confirming their own biases. Like what I like to talk about is that you have to follow validation frameworks and rigorous experimental mindset, but really you have to continuously remind yourself that your purpose is invalidation. So you should really invalidate bad ideas instead of trying to validate good ideas, because if your objective is to validate something that you like, or you know, If you write a bunch of assumptions and try to validate them, you'll find reasons to believe that those are true. While the purpose should be really invalidating bad ideas. And I think you did a very, very good job on that, really going out, talking to a lot of people. I remember sometimes challenging you to go to restaurants and talk to their chefs about, their practices, really understand the problem from as many aspects as you can. And even, I think one of the very impressive things that you did was creating a social media account on TikTok, as you pointed out earlier, to be able to interact with people on a very continuous basis, because a lot of the time you might fall into a specific mindset and assumption about hypothesis about the audience, about the product, about the solution you want to create, but then you lose touch with that. As soon as you stop paying attention, you lose a lot of context around why you made that decision. But having that social media, or I guess that's more of a question, like from your experience, how did having that social media account help you validate the problem statement, validate the solution, validate your approach to distributing your solution to the audience you had?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm very thankful, Amir, that you suggested that I create a social media account, because it's been really incredible, not just from a perspective of using it to validate or invalidate the ideas behind FoodShake, but also connecting with other people in the vegan community. It's been nice, and I've actually met some friends through TikTok, which is pretty great. And I think how the social media account's been useful for me, it really relates to the user research piece when you want to think about FoodShake. And even before I had a prototype, I was talking to people. So again, trying to validate or invalidate assumptions from this so what exercise and move closer to my actual problem statement that I cared about. And so how I started was I messaged in this Toronto Vegans Facebook group saying, hey, I'm working on a vegan app. Would really appreciate speaking to you about your vegan lifestyle. And I tried to be very grateful and say, your thoughts will directly contribute to the development of the app. And that worked pretty well in the Toronto Vegan Facebook group. And I posted in several other Facebook groups and ended up getting banned from some of them because apparently I was engaging in self-promotion. So this is where the TikTok has been really useful as well, because if Toronto Vegans is the only Facebook group that I'm really welcome to post in, well, eventually that's going to be saturated. I will have talked to pretty much everybody who's interested in talking to me. But with TikTok, I have a ever increasing platform. Now I have 10,000 followers, 2,000 on Instagram. It's just incredible to me how it's been growing. And I'm at the point where I've built relationships with people on both platforms, and I'm able to now DM them and say, hey, are you free for a 20-minute chat? And to be able to have people who are willing to talk to me, but I don't know them in person. So I feel like less positively biased in that way. I've been able to really quickly prototype ideas. Like an idea that I was thinking about with regards to FoodShake was, would building a mentorship component to the app be useful? And I was able to talk to a few folks like that week about mentorship, because I knew from their profiles that they were involved in that. So yeah, just the reach of people that I have access to thanks to social media has been quite incredible.
As a researcher, like a through and through researcher, you've said so many things that make me happy, and I don't know where to go next, but I'm going to pick one. So one, you've done that pre-market research, you've done those user interviews, and then you didn't stop there, right? Like you had a prototype and went back to users. So I'm curious, like what was kind of the difference in the content when you had those initial sessions as user interviews versus now I have a mock-up? It's a totally different experience because there's so much value in both, and talking to people is amazing. But the reality is, we say things, but we don't always, well, most of the times we don't do what we say. So there's some things we can learn from user interviews and very different things from actually having like a Figma or whatever markup, right? How was your experience between those two?
Yeah, that's a very good question too. So how I went from the pre-prototype phase to the prototype phase, well, before creating a prototype, you mentioned Figma. So I had created a Figma mockup that showed what the app might look like. So on the left, your original recipe, and I used spaghetti bolognese as the example static recipe. And then on the right, there was another text box that showed the vegan version. And again, I had messaged in the Toronto Vegan Facebook group, and the interview process here was pretty similar to the pre-prototype phase, with, I think, questions that were a bit more refined, a bit less general. In the pre-prototype phase, I asked questions like, tell me what it's like for you at the grocery store. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to help at all, but I had an idea that maybe it would be useful in telling me how experienced people are in the kitchen or something like that. Anyway, so the Figma mock-up stage, again, I asked these questions that were a bit more refined, and then I would show them the mock-up to see if they were excited, see if they found it intuitive. And I was surprised by the results because they were quite positive. I think there was a lot of a wow factor. People would say, if you could really do this, this would be incredible. And whenever there was that positive response, I would then follow up and ask, well, how much would you pay for this? Really as a gauge of, do they actually care enough to throw their money at it? And again, I was surprised. I think maybe half the people would say, oh no, I think I would figure this out another way. And then they would tell me the ways that they would veganize recipes on their own, which would again help me realize, what I might have been missing. And half the people would say, this is great, I would definitely pay for this. And oftentimes they would throw out numbers like $20 a month, which was much higher than I would have expected. And then there was other things I learned from this Figma mockup interview phase. I sort of figured out the, demographic that I should focus on. A lot of people who I would categorize as older and more experienced in life, they said things like they wouldn't even use an app to cook at all because they would make their screen dirty while they were cooking. So that was sort of interesting, but helped me, zero into the demographics.
How you mentioned, just DMing people on TikTok. How did you come up with that idea? I mean, obviously TikTok in general, but the recruiting part, that's a place where most people stop, because the reality is it's so hard to just lock someone for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and just ask them questions, and particularly if you don't have a generous incentive. So I think you went about it in a very innovative way, but I'm just curious how the experience have been and the responses you have gotten.
Yeah, so I definitely had people book me and not show up, which was always quite frustrating, but I've gotten used to it. And in general, so the interesting thing about TikTok is that you can only DM people if you're friends with them on the platform. So when I first joined TikTok, I went and followed a bunch of accounts where people seem like they're vegan or into plant-based eating. So there was already that sort of relationship built, so they were more likely to reply to me. And I think I take the approach that these people are nice, they're strangers, maybe they think I'm nice as well because they follow me and they comment on my videos, and why not just message them and see what happens? And either I would not get a reply or I would get a yes. I actually haven't ever had anybody say no. Well, I guess I would get people saying yes and then ghost me, which is pretty much a no.
If it makes you feel any better, I've paid people up to $1,000 an hour and they still did not show up sometimes.
Wow.
So that's just life.
Yeah, I remember, Serena, I think it was the very, very first time you mentioned this idea to me, probably just over a year ago. And I don't know if it was a mean thing to say or not, but I think I said it very directly to you that I have no doubt that you can build a technical product, but the biggest question is distribution. And that's a problem that I had faced myself, in building the product you're building. And I aggregate intellect, that when we talk to investors, a lot of the time they are like, okay, you're a technical guy, I'm sure you can build it, but I don't believe you can sell this. And, in a lot of cases they were right. So the idea of creating the social media partly was, motivated by the fact that, you get to experiment with distribution very, very early on. A thing that I like to say whenever, I'm talking to people who are getting into product development is that if you don't know where people that you want to sell to hang out, to ask them your research interview questions. you have zero chance of selling to them, right? So the fact that you created a community, I think, audience, but a smaller portion of it became your community, I think, was very valuable. And to sort of resonate with what Roxana pointed out, the fact that I believe you've been publishing videos every day, or more than once a day, even in some cases, and a lot of these are educational. Like a lot of these are things that you're actually teaching people how to do something. Like it is not promoting your product, it is not promoting your idea, it's not promoting yourself. It is, here is how I would go about creating this particular thing. So a lot of farming, a lot of planting the seeds, so that eventually when you need them to ask them for 20 minutes of their time, they're a lot more willing to give back because you've already invested so much value, you provided so much value to them. And the whole idea of community-led growth and community-led product development is around because of that fact. And we're seeing a lot of products that are taking that approach. And I think, you experienced that very firsthand as well.
I've been hearing a lot, like, obviously community is important to all of us in this room and all of our followers, I'd say. But some of the recent discussions I've been having, and I think it's a very valid one, is, oh, I was so good when everything was in person, and I can make those relationships in a room, and I can sell. It's not even selling at that point. It's just, I can show the value for my offering, and it just happens naturally. But I fail online. What kept you going when you started on TikTok? Like, did you have people like from day one, from week one? Like, if someone were to start today and then they have no friends, they have no followers, what's that thing to kind of not give up? And when do you expect to see a return on investment? Because I feel like too many of us would give up too early, because in person, you strike a conversation and there's instantaneous gratification. But once you open it globally, you can reach a much wider audience, but you're also a tiny, tiny, tiny fish. So how long do you wait until you pivot and say, maybe this is not the right thing?
Yeah, this is one of my new favorite topics, actually, how to grow on social media and how to stay consistent. I think one reason I have stayed consistent is because generally when I decide I want to do something, I actually do it, and I will set a schedule for myself and follow it. So that's what I did with TikTok, and I said, I'm going to post every single day because the TikTok gurus online on YouTube and who also post on TikTok say post every day. And I was fortunate to get decent traction within the first 2 weeks. I think within 2 weeks, my first video that got 30,000 views was me going to the grocery store and pulling a Doritos package off of the shelf and saying, "Is this vegan?" 3, 2, 1, it's vegan. And that was very surprising and controversial. And that was enough for me to say, oh, wow, people actually seem to notice me and see me. And at that point, I think I had maybe, I want to say like 200 followers, and I said to myself, I'm going to give it 3 months. If I can get to 1,000 followers in 3 months, I will keep on going. And I hit that 1,000 followers actually within the month. So shortly after I had posted that video, that blew up. And then my next goal was 5,000. Then my next goal was 10,000. And there definitely were times when there were lulls, but I just kept saying to myself that growth isn't something that happens overnight. There are, like, you hear those cases, but the majority of people on social media have grown their following over 5 or 6 years. And I also was helped in this regard by some other people on social media, again, people that I met who I would have conversations with, and they would say, oh wow, this is so great to see how you're posting every day already, and you already have say 1,000 followers. For me it took, and then they would say how long it took them. So yeah, really, to answer your question, being diligent, setting realistic goals, and talking to other people really helped me stay motivated.
So the topic that you're bringing up, Roxana, and sort of the process that Serena went through is one of the things that I also spend a lot of time thinking about, and Serena and I also spend quite a bit of time talking about it, is the difference between audience and communities. So, the fact that you have a number of N people on social media who are paying attention to what you're producing means that you have an audience. That's, a fertile ground for everything else you want to do. And growing that requires a lot of consistency, etc. But really the value that comes out of, the activity you're doing, the return on investment is that community, is that core of people that go beyond just listening to you. They start interacting with each other. They start doing things because you're inspiring them, you're helping them interact with each other, you're giving them opportunities to do activities together even. And I also have heard, that comment about, oh, it is not in person, therefore it is not a community, which has, really pushed me to think, especially during COVID, to rethink, what does it mean to be a community, especially with things like open source software movement that we've been seeing over the past, almost 2.5 decades. A lot of people from, as Serena was saying, like a lot of people that don't know each other individually, have not interacted with each other IRL, but have been working together for years without being paid, without being particularly incentivized, just because there is some sort of a value exchange. And I think when that value exchange exists, then you have a community. And the value exchange not from you as the lead facilitator of the community, but between the participants in that community. So sometimes the value is the in-person interactions. So that's a completely valid value exchange. Therefore, conferences, for example, a lot of the interactions are water cooler interactions, the value is exchanged there, et cetera, et cetera. So making that online, harder to justify, but there are a lot of other types of value exchange that you can be created that doesn't require you to be able to touch the other person, even know who the other person is necessarily, right? So, really thinking about the value exchange from, the platform, that is Serena in this case, and the audience, and then, members of the audience, I think is a very, very important thing to think about and resolve. And I think Serena spent a lot of time thinking about that, and how to create engagements within the audience so that they turn into communities. One of the interesting things, though, that you mentioned earlier, Serena, was how thinking about embeddings in machine learning sense was a way for you to get into the problem statement. And even, I see that a lot in our community, that a lot of the time people come in and say, oh, I've seen this new NLP technique and I'm so excited to create this product with it. So, completely starting from the solution, forgetting all the problem statement, et cetera, et cetera. But, you course corrected along the way. But have you even started using machine learning in your products, or how's that part going? Like, you had a vision. Did that happen at all, or how has your thinking about that evolved over time since you mentioned it?
Yeah, so I do not use any machine learning in my platform or in my project or product, I should say. I use machine learning inspired techniques. So in terms of, natural language processing techniques with pre-processing the data and dealing with text data, I do all of that, but that doesn't touch any machine learning. So essentially what powers the backend is a dictionary approach. So chicken will always be replaced with tofu as, the highest rank substitute. There can be a second and third rank substitute, which might be like vegan chicken, for example, or chickpeas. So in that regard, there is no machine learning, but as I said, I've borrowed from machine learning ideas, which is considering the context of a recipe. And this gets into the science of vegan cooking and vegan baking in particular, where when you're baking with an egg, the function of the egg differs depending on if it's leavening a baked good or if it's binding a baked good. And in order to know that, you need to look at the context. And I spent a lot of time looking at different vegan baking recipes and sort of non-vegan baked good recipes, and I came up with a ratio of flour to fat. So if the ratio of flour to fat is 3 to 1, then an egg is, or greater than 3 to 1, then an egg is leavening. If it's less than 3 to 1, it's binding. And based on that, I knew which egg replacer to use. And in order to determine that ratio, I had to look at the context. So I had to do a bit of, not too difficult, but slightly tricky coding in order to, like, given a recipe that's, or given an ingredient that's anywhere in a recipe, I would have to like look behind and look ahead of that ingredient. But again, all of this is done without machine learning. But if you were to input a recipe into FoodShake for cookies, you might actually think that there's some machine learning powering it, because the output substitute for egg really differs based on the context.
I am a bit scared to say this, but one of the often conversations that I have in just like smaller session, like workshops starting with people just starting up, is that the go-to is far too often an AI solution. And that's not always what you need, at least for version 1 or version 2, right? Like there could be a lot of value without that. And look at you, you're actually an expert. So you have it at your fingertips, but you went a different way because of all these reasons. So what's your advice, I guess, for people just starting up and thinking AI is the answer? Like how do you take a step back to really determine, like, what are those questions to kind of check mark or determine, is it really the answer, or am I making my road to market longer, or even my road to failure longer? Sometimes you fail and you want to fail fast, really, right? So how do you go about that?
Yeah, in general, I like to follow Occam's razor, which is the simplest solution is often the best solution. And even though implementing a large-scale language model to do translation from non-vegan to vegan, that would be amazing, and that's my ultimate goal. I can now see, and that's what I wanted to do at the beginning, but I can now see that I could have spent a year even creating this without having even showed anything to a user. And the process that I went through with not even having a prototype to show and then having just a mock-up on Figma, that enabled me to actually talk to people. And if I had found that every single person I talked to hated the idea, or another product like this existed that was already perfect, then, like talking to users, it allows you to just stop yourself without investing all of this time building that cool solution. Like it could just be a waste of time. And even though I would be very happy and proud of myself if I built a complicated machine learning model, I'd probably be more upset at myself for wasting a year, for example.
Yeah, and something else that this makes me think of is oftentimes, obviously, we're in a very competitive market all across boards. There's similar products out there. And when someone new enters the market, like with a new product, there's this like urge to, I need to beat whatever else is existing on the market. But it seems to me that you really grew along with the people using your app. So that's such a different approach, and it kind of ties back in to community and to one of those fundamental needs that we have as people. Like we want to be contributors, right? It made me think of a random app related to like period tracking, and I've used it at some point when I was super stressed out and I wanted to, and then I didn't need it anymore. But what made me kept using it was that they were using the data very transparently and providing it for science, because there's very few publications, there's very little longitudinal data and these things. So I continued being engaged because of that desire to contribute and be a part of, okay, it's going to serve someone somehow, right? So I feel like you've done that from the beginning. You had people in the loop and you just kept going back, and they understood that each day it's going to be a better experience they have with the app, but they grew with it, which is mind-blowing to me.
This makes me so happy to hear you say that. And I'm very proud, really, to say that every feature right now on FoodShake, on the website, foodshakeapp.com, by the way, it's there because of someone who suggested it to me. So I initially had the vegan conversion. So it just, input text box, output text box. But throughout my conversations with people said, oh, well, what if I don't like tofu? Is there anything else I can substitute for chicken? And other people would say, oh, well, I guess I see that you're using, tofu as the vegan substitute for chicken, but why? And why does chicken even need to be in that recipe in the first place? So as a result of that, I added up to 3 different substitutions per non-vegan ingredient. I also added substitution notes that tell you what the non-vegan ingredient is actually doing in the recipe and then tells you why and how to substitute with the vegan version. And I wouldn't have come up with any of that if I hadn't talked to users. And there were times, or there was one time in particular, I came up with a feature that I remember I mentioned it on a deep random talk, and Amir went, I'm not so sure about that. And that feature I added it just because I saw a competitor had done it, but I hadn't validated it with any user or any other person. And I ended up removing it because it just didn't make sense. So now everything is, again, really there because somebody had suggested it, which makes me very happy.
You really, really listen to your users or potential users. Are there things that, like, taking a few or many steps back, that kind of stand out to you? Like, I went in thinking this and I've learned it was totally different.
I think where my assumptions were invalidated, it was really around the types of people who would be interested in using the app. So going back to the idea of the inception, or I should say it's around the types of people who deal with this problem, because I really want to think about the problem rather than the solution. So going back to the inception of it, which is my dad, who had trouble or still has trouble making recipes vegan, I thought that this app or this problem was something that non-vegans had. I didn't think it was a problem actually for vegans. But throughout talking to various people in the vegan community, and then also, non-vegan friends of mine and friends of people that I had talked to in the community, I realized that this is a problem for people who are vegan. This app is for people who are vegan. And then going down a bit further, I had assumptions around the sort of life cycle of someone's vegan journey where this app would be useful. And now I've realized it seems to be really something that's great for people around like the 3-month to 18-month mark of being vegan. But sort of before that, it would be a bit too soon. And after that, they might not need it anymore. So yeah, that's where my assumptions have really been invalidated.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, I guess, that you have experienced along this journey was that, the whole idea started as a technical idea, but sort of, as product development should be, you ended up pretty much mapping human behavior as came to this particular problem. And sort of as Roxana said, you sort of evolved with that problem statement. You started, identifying all the layers of it, and started creating solutions for each of those layers. Starting with qualitative research, then moving on to, more static prototypes, mock-ups on back of napkin kind of ideas, then Figma, like more live prototype. Eventually, currently you're in a stage of a live data prototype is what we call it, right? Like you have an app. It is a data-driven app, largely rule-based system. As you pointed out, the next big challenge is, replacing sort of a static replacements and, fixed replacements with replacement options. Later replacing, adding this layer of contextual recommendations instead of just, fixed replacements, et cetera, et cetera. And, those are probably the places that things get a little more fuzzy, and it makes sense to start including machine learning. And this whole journey is the right way to go about it because, as you said, had you started on, the complex machine learning model, you had missed the opportunity to learn so much about the human behavior, like what you just said about, I assume these were people who had the problem, but really there's this other group of people who really are suffering from this problem. And, even like the operational model of your application, initially you were thinking about this could be just a utility that people use. Now you're adding human element to it potentially, like the mentorship program that you're thinking about. So this is a remarkable journey of, you starting from a problem that was internal, but externalizing that and trying to understand, okay, how are all the humans who are interacting with this problem behaving, and how do they want to behave, and where can we take them from there? But that brings up to the next stage, like where is food shake going from here? You have worked up to the live data prototype, but what, and one thing that we didn't, I guess Roxana mentioned a few times, but didn't say the fine print, that you've done an immense amount of work, but all of this is like evenings and weekends. You always have had a full-time job pretty much up to this point. So how are you going to scale your operation in this app on the technical side?
Yeah, so I have started, I would say, scaling somewhat technically. I've actually started hiring people on Upwork to help me with technical components. And I was very careful about this because I wanted to build the core substitution engine myself using my essentially vegan domain knowledge. And that's something that I want to keep internal to myself. I don't want to share that with any, like, just anybody. But there are certain things in the app where it's just, a bit more of an engineering effort than I would like. So I've been working with some incredible contractors on Upwork, and it's been a really nice time. So that's where that's scaled there. And in terms of scaling beyond that, I think I need to think that through, because of course I am just one person and doing this evenings and weekends. But what I would like to see, or where I would like to see this go, is taking this existing prototype and talking to even more people. And Amir, we've talked about this idea of, can I create a viral social media campaign to get more and more people to try Food Shake? I'm really going to have to think hard about how to scale that beyond hiring more people on Upwork to, say, do user interviews for me, which I think might not work out so well because I really want to be the one talking to the users. And on the topic of talking to users and the live prototype, having this live prototype has actually been the best part of the whole journey for me, because I've been able to talk to two users in particular, Nancy and Mario, and I hope that they can watch this. And I remember after I had great chats with the two of them, and then follow-up conversations. And in my follow-up conversations with both of them, and I'll mention what Nancy had said. She started with, "Oh, hi, Serena. I just wanted to tell you I've been having such a great time with your app. My mom had so many recipes that I used to enjoy growing up, but once I went plant-based, I just haven't been able to enjoy my mom's food. But thanks to your app, now I've printed out all of her recipes. They're all vegan now. This is so incredible." And I think after that call with Nancy, I was jumping up and down for joy, thinking, there's somebody, there's Nancy and there's Mario, and they have this problem, and I've actually helped them. So that has just been just so incredible.
Yeah, that's phenomenal to hear. Like, those moments. It is only two users that you have affected their lives with your product, and that's a remarkable. That's a you spend all of the time you have to get to this point where, I don't know if you were seeing, but kind of the imaginative face of them lighting up with joy, saying that I can re-enjoy all of the things that I used to. So, and of course, one of the things that you have considered is that now that you have a live prototype that people can interact with, as you're getting more users, you can sort of start going from qualitative research into quantitative research. Use tools like Mixpanel and such to track event level interactions of users with your product, so that you can continue your user research, but in a more quantitative, data-driven, event-driven way. And of course, you can design experiments and plans to do that more qualitatively at larger scale. Thank you both for this conversation. I enjoyed it. Hopefully you did as well. It's definitely been very rewarding to see your journey, Serena, and I'm excited to see where you take this.
We talked through all of the stages, right, of product development, and you've done them all on your own. One of the resources that I've included, I thought it was really interesting because the last phase seems to be really forgotten in a very fast-paced environment, particularly if you have another full-time job. But really, the last stage is celebration, and you've made it so far.
You've done an incredible work. Like, I know, we have this periodic call, every 2 or 3 weeks, and Serena sometimes shows up and she's like, yeah, I haven't done a lot, and then goes on to talk for half an hour about all of the things that she's done. So she's been doing a fantastic job on this product, and it shows how much passion she has about a problem statement and the movement that she's creating. So thank you so much for listening to this conversation. Hope you learned something new. Hope you're inspired to build things you care about. And reach out to any of us if you have questions, if you have an inspiration to build something awesome and you don't know where to start. Hopefully this gives you some inspirations, but we're always open to, give you some feedback about what you're thinking. Thank you so much, Serena and Roxana, and excited for our next episodes. Please join next week for our next episode. Thank you so much.